Retired teacher exposed HOA for only enforcing rules on people of color, and the ending silenced the entire neighborhood. They fined her for her porch flowers, but ignored the broken-down RV leaking oil across the white neighbor's lawn. That's when Mrs. Laverne Carter decided she wasn't going to just tend her garden anymore, she was going to expose the entire rotten system. Mrs. Laverne Carter had taught history in Atlanta public schools for 42 years. The kind of teacher who made you feel like Harriet Tubman was your auntie and the Voting Rights Act was still wet ink. She moved to the Pinebrook Meadows retirement community to enjoy peace, a few roses, and the satisfaction of finally being able to sit in silence without a classroom of teenagers asking if they could eat chips during lectures. She expected quiet. She didn't expect war. It started with a letter, plain white envelope, no name on the front. Inside, it read, "Dear Mrs. Carter, your porch display exceeds HOA regulations by 2 decorative items. Please remove the wind chimes and secondary planter within 7 days or risk a $150 fine. Sincerely, Pinebrook Meadows HOA Compliance Committee. 2 decorative items, wind chimes and a planter." Laverne chuckled. They're policing planters now, she muttered to herself. But when she stepped outside, she noticed something else. Her neighbor's plastic flamingos were still strutting proudly across their front yard. 6 of them, bright pink, loud, against a patchy, brown lawn. Her neighbor was white. So were the rest of the families on her row. Except her. She didn't remove a thing. Instead, she went to the next HOA meeting. The room was a sea of beige cardigans, beige coffee cups, beige smiles that thinned when she walked in. Laverne sat in the back, listened to the updates about fencing and garbage bin placement, and waited. When they opened the floor to residents, she stood. "My name is Laverne Carter. I received a violation for having 2 decorative items too many, wind chimes and a planter. But I noticed that several homes on my block have far more visible decorations, pink flamingos, oversized wreaths, even flags, and none of them received warnings. I'd like an explanation." The room went quiet. Then a man in a sweater vest, HOA president, Greg Walters, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter, the compliance notices are based on visual inspections and reports submitted to our committee. It's possible some homes were simply not flagged yet." "Yet?" she asked. "Or never?" Greg fumbled. "It's not personal." She nodded slowly. "I agree. It's not personal. It's systemic." The meeting ended in a hurry. She got another letter the next day. This one said she was creating a hostile environment. That's when she knew. This wasn't about wind chimes. It was about her. So she went full teacher mode. She documented everything. She walked the neighborhood with a clipboard, noting every home with infractions. Christmas lights still up in February. Garden statues. DIY bird baths. She recorded the addresses. Took photos. Looked up ownership records. The majority of the cited homes belonged to people of color. The majority of the ignored infractions? White homeowners. She compiled it all into a spreadsheet labeled Pinebrook Disparities, color-coded, with dates, violations, and outcomes. She even made graphs. Then she did what any teacher would do. She made lesson plans. She contacted her former student, Jordan Reeves, now a civil rights attorney in Atlanta. She sent him the spreadsheet, the photos, the letters. Jordan called her within the hour. "Ms. Carter, this is a discrimination suit waiting to happen." "I know, baby," she said, "but I want to give them a chance to correct it first." "You're too kind," Jordan muttered. "No," she said. "I'm strategic." She printed everything. 3 binders. One for her. One for the HOA, one for the press just in case. She brought it to the next HOA meeting. She didn't sit in the back this time. "Before we begin," she said, placing the binder on the table, "I'd like to distribute some homework." Greg's face tightened. These binders contain evidence that enforcement of HOA rules in Pinebrook Meadows has disproportionately targeted residents of color. I've included dates, photos, and documented outcomes. I'd like this to be entered into the meeting minutes. "Mrs. Carter, that's not." She raised a hand. Not loud, but commanding. "I'm not done." Silence. "I'm requesting a formal audit of all HOA enforcement actions over the last 2 years. I'm requesting a moratorium on all fines until the audit is complete. And I'm requesting that your so-called compliance officer, who I have yet to meet, be identified and made available to residents for questions." Greg turned red. A woman 2 rows back, Latina, mid-60s, started clapping softly. Then another. and another. By the end, half the room was applauding. The other half was trying not to look at Laverne. The meeting adjourned without a response. 3 days later, Laverne received an anonymous note in her mailbox. No envelope, just a piece of paper with the words, "Go back to where you came from." She sat on her porch, holding the note, watching the wind chimes sway gently. Her fingers trembled. But she didn't cry. She planted 2 more planters. And a bigger wind chime. The next morning, she went to the local paper. The Pinebrook Gazette wasn't the New York Times, but it had teeth when it wanted to. And when Mrs. Carter walked in with a binder full of color-coded discrimination and a voice that could silence an auditorium, Editor-in-Chief Melina Ross didn't even blink before saying, "We're printing this." The article hit the following Sunday. A full-page feature titled, "Equal Rules or Equal Silence," ran with side-by-side images. Laverne's modest porch with 2 flower pots and a set of wind chimes, and her neighbor's lawn 3 houses down littered with plastic flamingos, solar gnomes, and a plywood cutout of Elvis. The article listed data from her binder, quoting directly from the spreadsheet, and ending with a pointed sentence, "If silence is compliance, then Ms. Carter refuses to be silent." By Tuesday, the Pinebrook Facebook group imploded. Comments ranged from furious defense, "This has nothing to do with race," to begrudging curiosity, "Well, I've never gotten a notice and my fence has been leaning since 2017. But then a few brave souls started to speak up. A Filipino couple posted their own story, fined for a non-standard mailbox that had been in place since the previous, white, owner. A Black Vietnam veteran, Mr. Thomas, shared how he was cited for keeping his garbage bin in view a full 18 hours before pickup while his neighbors sat out all weekend, untouched. Suddenly, it wasn't just Laverne's battle anymore. It was a fire spreading. And Greg Walters? He panicked. At the next HOA meeting, he opened with a stiff apology. "We are looking into the enforcement history," he read from a paper. "We understand concerns have been raised and are committed to a fair and impartial community." Laverne waited until he was done. Then she stood. "If that were true," she said calmly, "you'd resign." Gasps. Greg sputtered. "Excuse me. You presided over a system that enforced selectively. Whether through direct order or silent consent, it happened on your watch. It happened repeatedly. And instead of investigating or correcting it, you doubled down and retaliated. That makes you unfit to lead." For the first time, Greg Walters was speechless. A resident in the back muttered, "She's got a point." Laverne didn't gloat. She just sat down. A week later, Greg resigned for personal reasons. The HOA board scrambled. A vote was called. And for the first time in the neighborhood's history, a woman of color, Marisol Rivera, a retired city planner, was elected HOA president. Her first act? Hiring an outside investigator to conduct a full equity audit of Pinebrook's enforcement history. Her second act? Calling Mrs. Carter into her office. "I owe you," Marisol said simply. "All of us do." "I didn't do it for recognition," Laverne said. "I know," Marisol replied. "But you're getting it anyway." They both laughed. Then Marisol leaned forward. "Would you consider joining the compliance committee? We need eyes that see what others try to ignore." Laverne raised an eyebrow. "You want me to be the one knocking on doors with clipboards now?" "No," Marisol smiled. "I want you to make sure no one abuses that clipboard again." Laverne considered it, then nodded. "All right, but I'm keeping my wind chimes." "Deal." By spring, the neighborhood looked different. Not in the paint colors or mailbox styles, but in who walked the streets without fear. People of color began speaking at meetings, showing up with notes and questions. Fines became transparent, documented publicly, and dispute processes were rewritten. The Pinebrook Gazette ran a follow-up piece. This one titled, "From Porches to Power, How One Retired Teacher Changed an Entire Neighborhood." Laverne's photo accompanied it. She stood in front of her home, arms crossed, wind chimes gently swaying beside her. In the background, a new sign stood at the Pinebrook entrance. Pinebrook Meadows, a fair and inclusive community. She didn't need that sign to know the truth. The change wasn't in the slogan. It was in the silence that followed her footsteps, now not hostile, but respectful. No more anonymous letters. No more cold stares. Just the creak of porch swings and the sound of children riding bikes across lawns that were now equally judged, equally tended, and equally protected. Still, she remained vigilant. Because change, she knew, wasn't a moment. It was a practice. And history, the kind she'd taught for decades, had a habit of repeating itself when folks got comfortable. So every Thursday, she put on her sun hat, picked up her clipboard, and walked the streets of Pinebrook. Not to write people up, but to remind them someone was watching, not with suspicion, but with care. And when new families moved in, especially the ones who looked like her, she made a point to visit. She brought a small plant for the porch. And if they asked her what she did, she'd say with a soft smile, "I used to teach history." Then, after a pause, she'd add, "Now, I help make sure we don't repeat it." It had been nearly a year since the first warning letter showed up in Laverne Carter's mailbox. A year since she was told her wind chimes were too much. A year since someone thought her presence, her blackness, needed to be trimmed like a weed. And now, she stood on the stage of the Pinebrook Community Center, receiving a standing ovation. "Tonight," said Marisol Rivera, now re-elected HOA president by a wide margin, "we honor a woman who reminded us of something basic but powerful. Equality is not passive. It is enforced, demanded, and protected." Mrs. Carter didn't just defend her flowers, she defended all of us. The room erupted into applause. People who once averted their eyes now clapped, some with tears. Neighbors who had never spoken to her now sent casseroles and thank you notes. But it wasn't the attention that meant the most to Laverne. It was who was watching. In the second row, seated beside Mrs. Carter's niece, was a young couple who had moved into Pinebrook only weeks ago. A black husband, an Indian-American wife, and their 6-year-old daughter, who kept clutching her tiny notebook as if she were already taking mental notes. After the ceremony, the girl shyly approached Laverne. "Are you the teacher who changed the rules?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Laverne knelt to her level. "I just reminded folks what the rules are supposed to mean." The little girl smiled. "I want to be like you." "You already are," Laverne said, touching her shoulder. "You're paying attention." The next day, something unusual happened. Greg Walters, the former HOA president, the same man who had once dismissed her with a tight-lipped smile and bureaucratic jargon, knocked on Laverne's door. She answered, surprised. He looked thinner, tired, and humbled. "Mrs. Carter," he said, removing his cap. "I came to apologize." "Properly." She studied him. "Go ahead." He exhaled, voice low. "I thought I was being fair. I thought I was just doing my job. But I never stopped to think about why only certain names kept showing up in reports. I let my bias, my blind spots, write policy, and you paid the price for it. I was wrong." She didn't smile, but she nodded. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "That takes courage." He looked down. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm learning." "Good," she said. "Keep learning. It's the only way we all move forward." He nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. "By the way," he added, "I joined the diversity training at my firm, and I've started volunteering at the literacy center downtown." Laverne raised an eyebrow. "Well, look at that." He chuckled awkwardly, then left. Later that week, Pinebrook held its first Unity Day, organized by the new HOA Outreach Committee co-chaired by Laverne and Marisol. There were food trucks, live jazz, cultural booths, and a panel on fair housing. More than half the neighborhood came. Laverne watched children of all backgrounds dance together in the lawn where she once stood alone with a warning letter in her hand. She saw Mr. Thomas, the Vietnam vet, laughing as he grilled ribs next to a Korean neighbor. She saw the Filipino couple exchanging gardening tips with the same woman who had once criticized their mailbox. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And progress was something Laverne Carter knew how to recognize. A few weeks later, she received a letter in the mail. But this one made her sit down and cry. It was from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They had read the Pinebrook story in the regional press. They had reviewed the audit completed under Marisol's leadership. They were now recommending Pinebrook's reform model be studied as a template for fair HOA practices nationwide. They asked Laverne to serve as an advisor. She held the letter to her chest. She didn't cry because she was proud, though she was. She cried because she had once feared no one would ever care about a black woman's wind chimes. Now, they wanted her voice in Washington. She flew to D.C. that fall, delivered remarks to a packed room of policymakers, told them exactly what she had told her students decades earlier. When rules are enforced unfairly, they aren't rules, they're tools of exclusion. And silence, even polite silence, is complicity. She ended with a picture of her porch. Flowers in bloom. Wind chimes singing. The audience rose to their feet. On the flight home, A young black man sitting next to her recognized her. "Wait," he whispered. "Are you Mrs. Carter from Pinebrook? The one who fought the HOA?" She smiled. "I suppose I am. My mom sent me the article," he said. She said, "If this lady was my teacher, I would have passed civics with an A." Laverne laughed. "Well," she said, "it's never too late to learn." Back in Pinebrook, life settled. But people remembered. And whenever a new resident moved in of any color, someone from the welcome committee dropped off a basket with a map, a local guide, and a small note that read, "In this neighborhood, fairness blooms thanks to one retired teacher who refused to stay quiet." The HOA, now fully restructured, enforced rules evenly. But more than that, it asked questions it had never bothered with before. Like, why is this rule here? Who does it protect? Who does it punish? Laverne walked her neighborhood weekly, not with suspicion, but with love. When she passed porches with children's toys scattered or wildflowers growing freely, she didn't judge. She smiled. Because in those signs of life, she saw resistance. She saw beauty. She saw the legacy of every teacher, every fighter, every neighbor who chose justice over comfort. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the wind caught her wind chimes just right, she sat on her porch with a cup of tea and listened. Not just to the sound, but to the silence that had once condemned her, now transformed into a peace she had helped earn. She didn't need monuments. She didn't need plaques. She had something better. She had changed the neighborhood. And the neighborhood would never forget it.